All right, there's Knowles. Knowles, before we start, we're going to talk to you about the 4th of July, but before we start, I want to play this PragerU video. Will Witt, for some reason, went down to the Santa Monica beach to talk to girls in bathing suits. Now, I have no idea why a young man would do something like that, would do such a thing. But while he was there talking to girls in skimpy bathing suits, he was asking them what the 4th of July is. And, you know, if you can make a woman feel stupid, you might get somewhere with her. So here's Will Witt from PragerU.
Significance of 1776.
I don't know.
What's the significance of 1776?
I don't even know what that is.
It's a year.
Yeah, I figure.
Why do we celebrate the 4th of July?
I forgot.
What is the year 1776 about?
About the signing of the Declaration of Independence.
What's the significance of 1776?
Yeah, that one I don't know.
Not a history person.
I can tell. What's the significance of 1776?
Christopher Columbus.
Why is the year 1776 significant?
It's the Civil War.
Close.
Or the end of it. Or the end of slavery.
1776, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. That's why they say it, because it rhymes.
Oh.
1776, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. They say it because it rhymes. I'm leaving the country. So I thought I'd ask you. You're a millennial, right? I thought, do you have any idea what July 4th is about?
Well, as a millennial, I first have to observe, was that guy, Will Witt, was he constructed in a laboratory for social media? Everything about him, it's like he's made for Instagram.
He is. He actually is only this small. He's only like 3 inches tall, so he fits right into a YouTube screen. Yeah.
It is really depressing to see that video, except, of course, it backs up what we know from all recent polls about this. Marist did a huge poll in 2011 about what Americans know about July 4th, 1776. According to 14% of American teens, and this is 2011. I don't think things have gotten better since then.
Yeah.
But according to 14% of American teens, 1776 is when the United States declared independence from France.
Oh, no.
According to 5% of Americans, that's when the United States declared independence from Canada. 35% of Americans, when asked to pinpoint the century in which the American Revolution took place, really only 4 that there could be in the history of this continent, 35% of them don't know when it took place.
Wow.
So the big number from this survey is that 42% of Americans do not know that America declared independence on the 4th of July. That number alone is terrifying, but what's scary is how it varies by age. So nearly 70% of Americans younger than 30 do not know that. That drops to 41% between ages 30 and 44, and that drops again to 25% among ages 45 to 59. So the older people at least sort of remember that the United States declared independence. The younger Americans just don't know. And in part, it's because people are not taught civics anymore. In part, it's because they're raised in this culture where they hate the United States and they're told to disregard it so we can learn about, 3 centuries of the Mali Empire and all of the great achievements of Timbuktu or whatever.
It's when the left took over the universities and the schools. It's the left taking over the schools and they hate the country. Yeah.
That's right. But the story of 1776 is so incredible, and it's now because we have this privilege narrative. We think, oh, those were old rich white guys. I mean, this is what Howard Zinn writes about, right? Yeah. These are old rich white guys who are trying to protect their own money, and it's not about anything else. The men who signed their names to the Declaration of Independence were signing their death warrant. There's no other way to put it. They actually joked about this. We know from there aren't like minutes from the account of this, but we do know some of the people who were there talked about it later. It was a suicide pact. I think one of the members wrote that a pensive and awful silence pervaded the House as we were called up, one after another, to the table of the President of Congress, what was believed by many at the time to be our death warrants. Benjamin Harrison of Virginia said to Elbridge Gerry of Massachusetts, Harrison was much fatter than Gerry. Gerry is the guy from which we get the name gerrymandering. But he turned to him, the much fatter Harrison, and said, "I shall have great advantage over you, Mr. Gerry, when we are all hung for what we are now doing. From the size and weight of my body, I shall die in a few minutes, but from the lightness of your body, you will dance in the air an hour or two before you are dead.
Oh, man.
This is the kind of gallows humor.
Yeah.
And it's not like people were laughing. This is the kind of gallows humor that was going on as these men were clearly signing their own death warrants. Jerry himself was nearly caught and hanged on the night of Paul Revere's ride for Lexington and Concord. At the time they signed this document, the Revolutionary War had already been going on for a year at this point. People sort of forget that. This wasn't the beginning. The beginning happened in 1775. I have a little tie to this. Most of my ancestors were derelicts, but two of them fought at Bunker Hill, actually.
Really?
Yeah, John and Simon Knowles, and John died from his wounds at Bunker Hill.
Wow.
And Simon went on, served with Washington at Valley Forge and all that.
I'm impressed.
I know.
I thought you were just related to Beyonce. That's amazing.
And Hillary Clinton, is my fourth cousin once removed. It's true. Well, just like knowledge of American history over the generations, the quality has declined a little bit, I think is fair to say.
I think it's true, yeah.
But it was built, it was building over time. This didn't come out of nowhere. And the other lie that we hear today is this was just this political maneuver. The Declaration of Independence was just about protecting people's property. This was a profoundly philosophical document.
Yep.
It was a practical political document, but it was profoundly philosophical. This all began with the Continental Association in 1774 that instituted a trade boycott with Great Britain, and actually that included the slave trade. This will play an important role in the Declaration. In 1774, they decided we're not going to import slaves from Great Britain anymore. Great Britain foisted the slave trade on us. We're not going to participate. We're not going to buy tea from them either, But by as early as 1775, Thomas Jefferson still sort of liked the British. He says, believe me, there is not in the British Empire a man who more cordially loves the union with Great Britain than I do. But, we want to fix some of these imbalances and whatever. Right. By the time that 1776 rolled around, the colonies hated their imperial overlords. I mean, they were at a boiling point. You see this in totally different view. The British believed from 1688, from the Glorious Revolution, that Parliament was the supreme authority. Parliament couldn't do anything unconstitutional by definition. Right. Parliament is the supreme authority. But the United States already at this time had the idea that the Glorious Revolution, the Constitution of 1688, protected fundamental rights that we could appeal to heaven for. Parliament couldn't control them. The first flag, one of the first flags of the United States was the pine tree flag. It said, an appeal to God, an appeal to heaven. So after Thomas Paine published Common Sense in 1776, all hell breaks loose. These men pick Thomas Jefferson for the Committee of Five to draft the Declaration of Independence, and already at this time, there were about 90 resolutions throughout the colonies. We are going to declare independence. The United States is ready to do this. The future United States is ready to do this. The Lee Resolution passes. Coincidentally, as it is today, not on July 4th, but on July 2nd.
I know, that's true. John Adams thought this was going to be the great celebration. And what's kind of touching about that is Adams was always getting screwed because he was a short, ugly, obnoxious little guy.
Yeah, right.
And Thomas Jefferson was a tall, handsome guy. And so Adams, who made the famous speech that convinced them to vote this death warrant, this separation from Great Britain, thought, oh, well, this is going to be history forever. But instead, Thomas Jefferson got all the credit because they signed the Declaration. On the 4th,
yeah. This does make me think about all those poor political pundits. I love Charles Krauthammer, but he predicted a lot of things that didn't happen.
Right.
And all political pundits do that, right? And this is the most famous one ever from John Adams. The 2nd day of July, 1776, will be the most memorable epocha in the history of America.
Not so much. Not
close,
so much.
But no cigar.
Close, yeah.
So they passed the Lee Resolution, which formally declares independence from Britain today on the 2nd. And then 2 days later, they ratify it, and Jefferson gets all the credit.
Right.
But what's quite interesting, a lot of things were taken out of Jefferson's first draft because they had to get the southern states on boards.
Right.
One of those was ending slavery.
Right.
Ending the importation of slaves. So Jefferson said, the first draft was a little harsher on England than the second one. So they took that out. They said the Clause 2, this is Jefferson writing years later, the Clause 2 reprobating the enslaving the inhabitants of Africa was struck out in complaisance to South Carolina and Georgia, South Carolina, the state that has caused every problem in the history of the United States, who had never attempted to restrain the importation of slaves and who, on the contrary, still wished to continue it. Our northern brethren also, I believe, felt a little tender under these censures, for though their people had very few slaves themselves, yet they had been pretty considerable carriers of them to others. So for all of those who say this was not a philosophical document, America was built on slavery, from the very beginning, the entire country is uncomfortable with this.
Yep.
The Declaration is uncomfortable, and even the Northerners, who didn't have a lot of slaves, they felt the taint of being the traders of slaves, of importing them to the United States. The document is in two parts. This is why people don't understand it. Part of it is this very plain complaint, political, serious grievances against the king.
Right.
So a couple ones that are never quoted these days, but I really like them, are the king, he has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness of his invasions on the rights of the people. We need a little more manly firmness in our writing.
I know. Then we'd have to listen to the New York Times talk about how the right has pounced on manly firmness.
That's right, yeah, toxic manly firmness. And then my other favorite one is, he has excited domestic insurrections amongst us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. I love our founding philosophical document includes the phrase merciless Indian savages. So there's that practical part, but then on the philosophical part, you get from Jefferson, first of all, a lot of the Constitution of Virginia, but you also get Locke, you get Hutchinson, you get Burlamaqui, a lot of philosophers from the Scottish Enlightenment, who were writing at the time. You get a lot of them almost word for word, but because it was so in the air, there are little Americanized changes to the language. What's also interesting about this, and you'd think that the Declaration would have been forgotten between 1776 and 1860 maybe, rather than now, because it wasn't referenced a lot after the formation of the country. It was Lincoln who brought it back. The second birth of the nation.
The Gettysburg Address. Yeah.
And in the Gettysburg Address, he pulls it back and he really points to it as the philosophical underpinning of the United States.
Yep.
And when you think of the men in America, there are a lot of great men in American history, but the ones who both drafted the document and who have referred to it admiringly, they are the best people in the history of the United States.
Strangely enough, but they don't write for the New York Times. I got to stop you there.
That's all right. Well, you can bring Charles Blow on next to explain why I was wrong.
To tell us why you should be. We're just going to have two guys come in and arrest you. I think the New York Times, that's the way they want the country to be run. What are you talking about on your show? Today,
I'm going to talk about why the F everybody is so effing profane these days. I got into a long Twitter battle with Kathy Griffin last night where she called me all sorts of words, and I think Rubio is really onto something here.
I saw that. I was ashamed of you for even talking to her. All right, I'll see you later for the July 4th show.
All right, see you, Drew.
All right, take care. Really interesting. If you study the Declaration, all the things they complain about the king form the backbone of our constitutional protections and the Bill of Rights. So they were actually thinking about what they didn't like when they started to protect things like our speech.